And just like that, we are live. Oh, goodness gracious. How's it going, everybody? This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. And I'm with my good buddy, Nick Cavazos, as always. Always good that we're hanging out, Nick. But man, I feel like, what was it, 2 years ago? We had, unfortunately, kind of a similar talk. We were in the wake of Tricios Custodes, and now a huge band hammer, not even like a limp-wristed one, but like an actual huge band hammer has hit our poor brothers and sisters in the Diocese of Charlotte, which has been terribly unfortunate, and I've been praying a lot for them.
Yeah, talk about it just being absolutely wild. What's up, everybody? Hope you guys can slowly start teaming into the chat. But yeah, no, honestly, it's pretty weird, not gonna lie. Let's see, 2021 was when Traditionis came out, so it's been quite a bit of time. But you know, this document I think is very interesting on many levels. So there's kind of the comedic level. Some of you guys who saw my earlier video, you guys have seen that, kind of my initial reactions to everything. But then also, I think what's also interesting about this is kind of the ideological perspectives that we see forming in this discussion. So on the one hand, it's like we have, the stalwart traditionalists, of course, who are giving their critiques, if you will. But then also on the other hand, we're seeing kind of a new reaction, which is individuals who have been proponents of the reverent Latin Novus Ordo, kind of experiencing tinges of what the traditionalists have been experiencing for really 60 years, but especially over the last 4 years, pretty bad. What's up, Mrs. C? Yeah, I have seen the Pillar article. In fact, my friend Christian Wagner, he sent the Pillar article to me this morning. That was kind of indicative because the Rorato article that we'll throw up on the screen for you guys in a little while, we didn't know if it was confirmed this morning. I mean, it looked pretty official, but it was kind of like, is this legit, whistleblower, right. Hashtag 2017 presidency, am I right?
Yeah, honestly, goodness gracious. But nope, turned out to be legit, which makes it all the worse.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty crazy. So we'll get into that for you guys tonight on this beautiful Ascension Vigil, right?
Yes.
Kind of an interesting time.
Well, wait a second. I don't understand, though, what you mean by that, Nick, because the Ascension has been moved to Sunday, don't you know?
Yeah, except for like in the Northeast. That's kind of weird. I saw these like maps going around on social media of like states in which, the bishops have mandated it to be on Sunday or on the actual day. And it's like Nebraska and then like the Northeast.
Right.
It's like, it has to be tomorrow. And then everywhere else it's on Sunday. I'm like, all right, guys, can we just do this all on Thursday? I mean, is it really that hard? I mean, come on, we got robots doing stuff.
Well, if this was just the kind of canary in the coal mine. So I saw, let's see, we have the comment here, Mrs. C, have you read the Pillar article? Yeah, we have seen the Pillar article. And actually what we're going to do is, I don't have any, I've never met Bishop Martin before. And so he's not really under my radar. I've never really been in North Carolina, but seeing as this huge thing is coming out, I thought, Nick, that we'd kind of go through some of the juicier points of, not of an article, but actually of the actual kind of statement, the directive put out from His Excellency, because it is kind of a long, and we won't do all of it, but it is a very interesting. There's a lot of comments in there that I know that I'm sure will be very fun to turn loose on. And I haven't seen your full video, but for everyone, obviously those are on your channel right now and on mine, I want them to go out and check out your video, where I know that you kind of dissect some of these points that we'll bring up again. And I'm sure that was an absolute riot. And I'm happy that you decided to hop on with me tonight instead of, have a stomach ulcer and lie down or whatever it is.
For real. Yeah, we'll go through it tonight because honestly, like, there's some really weird stuff in this document. I mean, it's kind of what's interesting, and we may as well just jump into it. But to kind of preface this with everybody, there's like two really weird points in the beginning of this document, in my opinion. The first one is he kind of starts off in the first paragraph, and he talks about how basically he's not wanting to impose his own liturgical preferences, right? The bishop states that. As well as you see this recurring theme, this is my second point, this recurring theme throughout the entire document, which seems to suggest that he is not wanting to, and we're trying to avoid clericalism. It's kind of all the same kind of buzzwords that we've heard over the last decade. Avoid clericalism. Right. Don't make a partition between the priests and the lay folk, etc. And then he proceeds to give like 50 super niche restrictives everything from banning altar crucifixes and altar flowers. Women, you can be up there on the altar, but if you are up on the altar, you can't wear a chapel veil. No torch bearers are allowed. Ad orientem is banned. Latin apparently is essentially banned unless everybody in the room knows Latin. That's kind of the rule and the directive. It's pretty wild stuff. Pretty wild stuff.
Wild stuff's an understatement. So before we kind of break in, maybe, I mean, I know that you are a Thomist and not a canon lawyer, but nonetheless, when I think about some of these things which the bishop is bringing up, women cannot be in chapel veils. We have a talk about Latin later. Oh, there's one we'll get into about even the orientation of the altar, how ad orientem is banned in the church, capital C. Does this have any water? Can you actually ban a lector from having it, or a parishioner of having a chapel veil or something? That seems just so ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. So there is, of course, a legitimate role that the bishop has over the liturgy in his diocese. Of course, there's a legitimate role that the Pope has over the universal liturgy. But what I find very concerning about this, I think, and you have to take what I'm about to say by degrees. When you look at traditional theological manuals, you can find this in something as basic as an introduction to theology. When you look under the sources of revelation, what makes up tradition, right? Big T tradition is the Acts of the Magisterium, the unanimous consensus of the fathers, the scholastics, which would include the neo-scholastics, but also the liturgy, the missal itself would also constitute part of the Big T tradition. There's kind of been a lie that's kind of gone around in the last 60 years, which says that the liturgy is part of little T tradition. I don't know where that's come from, but that's not true. It's very much so part of the Big T tradition. But when it comes down to it, bishops can, to certain degrees, regulate things in their diocese, but then other things, no. And the way that especially that they can't, is if the Holy See has already granted permission to some type of use. So for instance, where I would disagree with some of my friends who are on the opposite side of maybe, say, the Latin Mass issue, I would extend this to, of course, the entire Tridentine Missal and say, yes, you can't ban it. But for instance, could a Pope get rid of certain prayers that are found in the Missal? So for instance, could the Pope come out tomorrow and say, I'll have the Latin Mass, but, I just don't want the prayers at the foot in the last gospel? Yeah, he could do that. You could have some disagreements with that approach, but he would have the rights to do that. When it comes to some of this stuff, though, with how niche things get, you can kind of see that these are not only exceeding beyond what the bishop's allowed to do, but actually contra what the church has in mind when it comes to the use of Latin in the liturgy, not just from a traditionalist standpoint, but even from just a mainstream Catholic perspective. People can go and read the 2007 general instruction released by the USCCB, and there's an entire section in there on the use of Latin in the liturgy.
Right.
And in fact, it actually promotes the use of Latin in the liturgy. And we're talking about the new Mass. In the context, especially of something like a multicultural, gathering of individuals or something like that. So, of course, while I still have my legitimate theological issues with the new rite of Mass, I'm just saying, if you were even mainstream going by the books, this is a massive step over what a bishop's allowed to do.
Yes. So I'd say without further ado, we'll probably hop around in the document as we kind of see fit. But just a reminder to all of our listeners and viewers that as much as I think Nick and I really do like to noodle on these things, and we're certainly standing with our brothers and sisters as best we can out in the poor Diocese of Charlotte. If this is going to be a thief for your inner peace, we're not trying to send any hatred or any animosity towards His Excellency Bishop Martin. We're actually praying for him, and we are praying that there is this unity of the church. And I'm actually very simple. I'm a very practical man, Nick. I'm just praying instantly for the Summorum days. I think that if we just let, the fact that there's all these Catholics who are praying, loving the Latin Mass, and the sort of, again, these very outdated for me, notions that there's just all these rad trads who are running around and saying everything about Vatican II was a mistake, no matter what. There's no nuance, and they're all just jerks online or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely demonstrably false to me in a lot of ways, because I've now been over the country just kind of looking at different things. But I want to go ahead and read. I'll start with this. This is on Rorate Caeli's blog. I'm going to hop down to the Latin language section. So friends who want to follow along, this is a very long letter, so I encourage you to read it carefully. We're not going to read it all the way through, but he starts by saying, one of the desires expressed by the Second Vatican Council was to embrace the vernacular language in our liturgies as an intelligible vessel through which the faithful may better comprehend the mysteries of faith. In my experience here in the Diocese of Charlotte, I have encountered a frequent and prevalent use of the Latin language in our parish liturgies. Latin is used from place to place for various and different motives. Some have employed its use as a safeguard against what I've addressed above, textual innovation and abuse. However, the faithful's full, conscious, and active participation is hindered wherever Latin is employed. Most of our faithful do not understand and will never comprehend the Latin language, especially those on the periphery. So we'll continue going on, but I just want to start with that very, very big sentence there, Nick. Wherever Latin is employed, it is somehow against the full, conscious, and active participation of the faithful, because we don't understand this language. So I don't know, Nick. In my 1962 missal, it's a quote, I think from maybe it's Pope Pius X, but it's talking about authentic, active participation. But apparently that was during the Latin Mass, which means it just didn't happen. It just wasn't a thing. You want your Dominus Vobiscum? Sorry, friend, it's gone.
Yeah, no, this is a point I brought up actually in my video today, which was Pius X, he very much so wants the faithful to actively participate in the liturgy. But that active participation, unfortunately, has been radically abused in its meaning and definitions in the last 60 years. What we're about to see in this document is essentially, I think that the bishop's mentality, and again, maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but it looks almost like the bishop's mentality is, unless you are, 1000% awake, staring at the same, new mass missal, saying the exact same things in kind of, like a robotic way, then you're not actively participating. Unless the laity is actually being able to do all of these things, they're not participating. The issue with this is that there's no room for prayer. So recently I went to my grandmother's funeral, God rest her soul. And it was the new mass, and I don't participate in the new mass, but I sit, and I pray my rosary. And I was just again shocked by, this was just kind of like an average parish, right? The sermon was pretty good, but looking around, it's like everybody, they're just kind of sitting around. It's not like they're actually doing anything.
Yeah.
Everything's in the vernacular, and there's no time to pray. I'm like, wow, there is no Roman canon. It's just this very brief canon number 2. There's no time to pray. No time, especially to engage in mental prayer. When we leave, no joke, when we leave, walking out in the recessional with the coffin, they're playing "He Will Raise You Up on Eagle's Wings." Like, no joke. I mean, it's a stereotype, but it's true. Yeah. And what's so interesting about this for so many people is that individuals aren't participating. But where are they participating? They're participating when they have their missals and they're praying with them. They're participating when they have their rosaries and they're listening, as Pius XII taught in Mediator Dei. They're praying and actively participating when they have their Father Lassant's devotionals of saints and stuff, and they're praying through those. That's active participation. It's you knowing and choosing to participate in the liturgy. Knowing and participating doesn't need to be, I say every single thing that the priest says in the exact same way, in the exact same mantra, doing the exact same things for an hour and a half, and then I'm done. That's robotic. That's almost helicopter mom mentality. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's not good.
Yeah, no, and here's something. And for me, growing up in the Novus Ordo and working at a place with graduate students of theology and all this kind of stuff, I can tell you this. There's this weird disconnect, I find. It's like we're talking past each other, because those who go to the traditional Latin Mass, like ourselves, it's not a matter that I can understand every single bit of Latin. I wish I spoke it more. In fact, going to the traditional Latin Mass by the way has actually helped me understand my roots of Latin. It's helped me actually understand Spanish better. So we'll get into a sentence later where His Excellency speaks about how just hearing Latin is not going to make people understand it. I'm like, well, that's demonstrably untrue, because one thing that it does really beautifully is Latin is the language of the church. Let's not put any holds against it. It is the language of the church. There's a reason why when you go to Rome, that it's in Latin. It's not in the thousands of languages that have come and gone in the history of the world. It unites us. And not only does it unite us, like you in Texas, me in Colorado, you Hispanic, me Black, it also unites us intimately to our ancestors across the whole time and space of history. So I find it very strange where if it's a question of comprehension, my question is very, very simple. The Mass has been put in the vernacular. And by the way, the document Second Vatican Council, they talk about having the epistle and the gospel in the vernacular. Hey, I think that's great. I like when the priest reads in whatever language afterwards if you're maybe not following along in your missal. That's fine by me. The problem that I have is this. Now that the Mass is in vernacular, what would you say, Nick? Do we as Catholics, do we innately just understand the Mass more? Now that the Mass is in English, with Eucharistic prayer number 3, that may or may not have been written on a napkin, do we understand the deep sacrifice of the Holy Mass? Or is it actually not so much just a matter of the language? Have we actually lost a bit of that Catholicism, that Catholicity, the heart of the faith with the reforms? So, when they talk about how somehow 70%, 60% of Catholics don't believe in the real presence, but they've heard the words every Sunday. How do they not believe? Surely they understand, right? It's a very strange false dichotomy that I feel is being set up here.
Yeah, no, the analogy I used this morning in my video was the Latin Mass, because it's in Latin, it's like you're diving into an ocean, and you can go deeper and deeper. It's something that is life-giving, and you're able to grow in it and learn more as time goes on. And this is one of the beauties of the Latin Mass, is that you can spend, as we have, a good amount of time in it. I've spent 6 years in the Latin Mass, and I'm still learning stuff all the time, and it's really beautiful, but it's increasing my faith, and it's sharpening me as a person. But then, and what's so good about that is that it is always giving. Whereas this mentality that the bishop is proposing is he's wanting to take this ocean and reduce it to a, if you will, a tide pool. He's saying, I want you to see the bottom immediately, know exactly what's going on, and that's it. And that's the reality is that, the scriptures themselves that we are hearing chanted in the liturgy are of themselves, regardless of their language, so incredibly deep.
Yeah.
But notice how this whole document is anthropocentric. It's man-centered. There's nothing in this document that talks about how Latin is a sacred language that we as created beings offer up in this, eternal memorial of the Son to the Father to, an infinite being. There's no language of that. There is just essentially, how can I benefit? What can I get out of it? And so it's quite a shame.
It's very much the same. And I want to read just a couple of sentences. So right after what we just read, our ancestors heard the Mass in Latin every Sunday, but never understood it. Their experience was a reason that the council asked the entire church to welcome the use of the vernacular languages. I find it disturbing that so many pastors and celebrants are inclined to force an unknown language on their congregation when the Lord's mission is to engage the lost. The church's teaching on evangelization and missionary efforts cry to us for sensitivity on the part of pastoral leaders to engage people where they are to bring them to Christ. So just want to give a historical note here. I watched a couple episodes of Shogun, which is a show on FX, and it takes place in 17th century Japan. The opening scene is this Japanese peasant. He's walking on the shoreline and he's chanting an Ave Maria or Regina Caeli, just kind of quietly to himself. I don't speak Japanese. I've never been to Japan. I certainly don't know anything about, deeply, I should say, about 17th century Japanese customs and the conflict between them and the Europeans. But let me tell you this, in a short span on a TV show, sitting here in the 21st century, I'm instantly connected with a brother in Christ. Now, I don't speak Latin, but I do know every single word of the Ave Maria and the Regina Caeli from Latin to English. It actually has unlocked the beauty of hearing the Hail Mary in Spanish for me, because now I just understand it a little bit deeper. So when it kind of comes, it's this weird thing, and it's such a historical slap in the face, not just for the millions of Catholics who were converted and whose faith deepened under the traditional Latin Mass, but it is a huge slap in the face for the however many countless missionaries and martyrs who brought the Mass to new worlds. The reason that you and I are sitting here in part is because Spain, right, colonized a lot of the new world and gave not just the language, but gave the faith as well. So it's very strange to me that in order for that kind of sentence to pass muster, you have to fundamentally believe that those thousands of years of Catholic evangelization, thousands of years of missionaries being sent forth by the Roman Church, that doesn't matter anymore. That wasn't real evangelization. It wasn't approach sensitive with sensitivity. And so while you have the great Jesuit martyrs in the Huron territories, they would they would learn how to speak the language of the Iroquois. They would be able to, and Hurons, they would be able to compose songs and hymns and chants in their native language. But fundamentally, they had the Latin Mass. The Mass that converted Saint Kateri, fun fact, friends, it was the Latin Mass. So it's just such a weird it's a weird historical disconnect. And it's not only unfortunate, it's actually just extremely dark, because again, it just removes thousands of years of history of the church and how she spreads and how she grows, because our ancestors just didn't get it. They just weren't smart enough. They weren't taught it,
Yeah, of course. I can't really improve upon what you just said, aside from what this ultimately does also in our own day is it introduces the hermeneutic of rupture even further. So it's just, this is something that I really, really think that Pope Leo needs to address, is that Benedict in his, Ravensbrück address, he talks about the hermeneutic of rupture and the hermeneutic of continuity. And the reality is this, is that we are at a period of time now, 60, 70 years after the council, where the popes really need, in good faith, to say, okay, we have looked at the stats, we have lost faith, even though we're having a lot of young conversions right now, right? We have lost in metrics every single area. We have division all over the church. We have, according to percentages, mass numbers of Catholics who don't believe the basics of Catholic faith in both dogma and morals, particularly sexual morals. What are we going to do? If we're going to continue just to basically say, let's double down on the 1960s kind of spirit of Vatican II project, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And this is the thing that people have to understand. Father Ripperger was so right about this when he talks about this in one of his talks on the 6 generations. When he's talking about the boomers, and again, this is not a slight to you boomers out there. This is just a point that he makes. He says that the curse that, the spiritual curse that the baby boomers really opened up, right, was a spirit of obstinacy and pride, thinking that they could just do everything better than what came before them. And what's so interesting about this is that both with Pope Francis, when it came to at least the TLM issue, as well as this mentality, we can look and we can say there's such beautiful fruit taking place right now in the Latin Mass. Conversions, baptisms, confirmations, weddings, the religious life. And the fraternity today, right, ordained 5 people to the priesthood, 5 men to the priesthood, right? There's so much beauty that's going on. And what are they doing? What are these bishops doing? They're digging their heels into the sand, saying, we will not budge from the 1970s project.
Yeah.
We will literally let the church burn to the ground, then admit we were wrong. My friend, humility is the beginning of the spiritual life. Admit that this is wrong. This doesn't mean, as I proposed in some of my videos recently, this doesn't mean that we can't reform the new Mass and get everybody to, come to a place where we can have the TLM and a reformed new Mass side by side, right? Maybe that's a debate in the future. But if you are going to continue to dig in your heels to the point where you're saying altar crucifixes don't belong in the new Mass. I put that quote up today on my Facebook page. It's an exact quote from the document, that the crucifix has no place on the altar of the Novus Ordo Mass. If you are going to say that, how can you say that you have the same faith as the saints that came before you?
Very, very well said. Unfortunately, beautifully said, right? I wish that, I wish we were at Happy Times. I wish it was the opposite. I wish His Excellency was like, hey, we're going back to Summorum. Something he said here also in the sentences I just read is he's talking about, and it's a clever trick, Jordan said. It's a clever trick, because he says that right now there are so many pastors and celebrants that are inclined to force an unknown language on their congregation. Like all these normal peasant Catholics are just minding their own vernacular language, and then bam, suddenly Father comes back and says Dominus Vobiscum, and they all freak out. But what did we see in Summorum? Summorum was very, very pastoral, and the fact that it was saying, listen, priests, especially at the behest of their faithful who want to offer the traditional Latin Mass, are allowed to offer the traditional Latin Mass. And in this case, look at the parishes that are being shut down or moved over, whatever words you want to use, in the Diocese of Charlotte. These are parishes that have a traditional Latin Mass. They have a place set apart in different churches for people who want to, the old Mass, priests too, who desire to offer it. And so who's doing the forcing here? So once again, you just kind of find this really clever twist of things where they're saying, well, it's this top down. See, we have to protect the good Catholic peasants in the pews. It's these top down priests who are forcing their conservative rigidity onto the faithful. and I'm stepping in to reverse it, when in fact it's the very faithful who love it, cultivate it, desire to have the traditional Latin Mass, and desire to have Latin in their parishes. And I've seen so much fruit of that in my own diocese here, by the way, that are actually suffering as a result. It's an unfortunate, it's a very sinister kind of trick there, I think.
It's also pot calling the kettle black, because look what he does. He's basically saying, don't force something on people. And then he gives like 50 points of what you're supposed to do. And so it doesn't make any sense. And what's so truly sad about this is that in summorum, right, it is pastorally sensible. But this is there's a few bishops out there who watch my show, right? You've contacted me before. There's a lot of priests out there who watch my show, a lot of religious as well. This is what I really have to say to you, and it's from the bottom of a sincere heart. As the four priests of the Diocese of Charlotte that put this letter together, and they sent it to their bishop, asking the bishop to, if you will, ease up on the TLM restrictions. What they beautifully said in it was, you have to understand that the traditional faithful right now have a distrust for the hierarchy, not because they want it, not because they're listening to some crazy podcasters, but because they've been the whipping boys and they've been ghettoized for the past 12 years, essentially. This is how I feel. I right now live in the freest country on planet Earth. Amen. And yet my church says that I cannot have Mass in my church building, but I can have it 50 feet away in a parish hall. So I can have it in there, but I can't have it in there. They also say I'm not allowed to publish it in a bulletin, according to Traditionis Custodes.
Yeah.
It also says, right, that whenever I want to get married one day, I can't have a Latin Mass wedding. If I have children one day, I can't have a Latin Mass baptism. If I want to receive, have my children receive confirmation, they can't receive in the traditional rite. How is this pastoral? Am I any less Catholic for wanting the same rights as all of my ancestors? Here's what you need to do, bishops and priests. You need to plead to the Holy Father on bended knee and say, rescind this stuff. Because not only is it affecting the little ones in Christ, I have students who come up to me, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, who say, why does the Pope, and they're referring to Pope Francis, but why does the Pope hate us? We don't understand why we're not allowed to have Mass in the church. You have to rescind this stuff, because if you allow this to happen, not only will they grow up thinking that the hierarchy does not care about them, but also it will put a logical scruple into the minds of every critical thinking person, Catholic or not, that says, is the Catholic Church against its own teaching? Because if we can be against our own received and approved rights, as the Council of Trent calls it, then what do we stand for as a church?
Yeah, I'm going to walk back from the ledge here, because it's a Glad Drive podcast on my side of things, and you just made a video not too long ago, so we'll try not to psych up. But here's something that I heard. A priest from my parish once gave a homily, and he had just come back from pilgrimage to Fatima, and he said something that was very, very distressing. He said that out there, he's a traditional Latin Mass priest, and so all the places, all the churches that were closed, by the way, churches that are very small in Spain, the faith has been under attack in Spain for a long time. It's terrible, but nonetheless, there was so much hostility from the priests of these parishes, from nuns, from wherever they wanted to celebrate Mass. This is what he discovered. The atheistic and the secularist hotel owners, people who did not have churches, were much more accommodating to allowing the traditional Latin Mass than our own parishes. You hit the nail on the head here, and it's terribly unfortunate. And I'm not one who believes in wallowing in despair, because this is, at the end of the day, Christ's church, and I believe these things will be sorted out, and we must play our part, But the reality is that that there is such a still serious attack on the faith, and the reason why is because the Catholic Church is still going through an identity crisis. This is what this priest said. There are bishops, there are priests. I've even met a couple of them, priests, not a bishop yet, thank God. But there are people, I think, who would rather let the faith die. They would rather see their parishes closed up. They would rather see the Catholic schools closed down, the convents emptied, than give the traditional Latin Mass, or give any, not even the traditional Latin Mass, any trapping of the world before the reforms. On my channel recently, I did a whole episode, a live stream, talking about this book I found, which is called Environment and Art in Catholic Media. It comes from the 70s, which is a decade I think the church pretends never existed. And we're breaking through, we're looking at these renovations that happened. And I did something towards the end of the show where I just wanted to see, where are those churches today when they stripped away the beauty of the church, when they stripped away all those things that point us to heaven. And what I discovered, much to my great sadness, and I do seriously mean the sadness, that a lot of those churches, if they haven't been closed, they've also been merged with other parishes, because despite the fact that here in the freest country on earth, we have a growing population, we have a shrinking population of Catholics, certainly Catholics who are there in their churches. And that sucks. I hate seeing closed churches, and I'm moving to towns and going to places where I see more and more of them. And it really does break my heart. And so when I read this kind of thing, and towards the end of His Excellency's letter here, he once again kind of reinforces that he's stepping into kind of, let's find his exact words to use, because I want to be very, very clear. He says this. He's talking about this unity of liturgy that we must have. And he says, it is unjust for the people of God to be subjected to older liturgical practices, musical selections, and ancient languages that were intentionally reformed or eliminated from the Novus Ordo Missae. The Mass and all of its sacraments are for us to ultimately be sent and to serve, which is the ultimate meaning of a life that is full, conscious, and active. By the way, you're totally right about it being a human-centric, a humanist document instead of Christ-centric. And that breaks my heart. That actually makes me very sad. It makes me sad for the bishop. It makes me sad for the parishioners, because once again, it is this great obstinacy to the serious joy and solace and deepening of our faith that you and I have found, and that so many Catholics around the world are also engaging in. So I always say this. I think that this, for me, is going to be one of those bellwether. This is going to be one of those litmus tests for Pope Leo XIV. I know he's doing his pontificate. I know that he knows this is going on. And it just kind of remains to see, are we going to continue this world of traditionis where traditionalists are the whipping boys over and over, and the same people that cry about unity and all this kind of stuff are the same people who put the band hammer down and everything? Or will we actually get to a little bit of sanity in the church, where will we actually see a genuine pastoral approach to traditional sons and daughters? Just say, hey, listen, clearly not all y'all have a rad trad Twitter account. That's silly. That's ridiculous. Even the rad trad darlings they talk about are not actually, like, a lot of them aren't even rad trads. It's like, I'm pretty sure that you and Taylor Marshall aren't jumping ship from the church anytime soon.
No.
So it's like you see this kind of thing. Can we just have some normalcy? Can we stop scapegoating? Despite the fact that we're supposed to be a listening church, a synodal church, does that actually mean we're going to listen to those who are having their churches closed down? Or does it mean that we're just going to continue doing these policies? We're going to continue destroying the faith in a lot of these places. And I hate to see, I will hate to see what is happening in a lot of dioceses, which is they close down a traditional en masse parish, or they move it away. Sometimes they're combined with the Novus Ordo parish, and they move that community, the traditional community, away. And then they have to give a letter a couple years later with some pithy kind of title, which essentially is, how do we restructure the diocese and close 25 and 30% of our parishes? That's the world that we're in, friends. And it's a very unfortunate world, because that's a world where there's less Catholicism. And that's something that we have to always resist.
Yeah, exactly. I think about the 40 plus parishes in Detroit recently that got shut down. And it's like, the people of Detroit, right, have lived in a situation for decades now where the city, essentially, its economy has collapsed, and it's in a very negative place, right, just on a natural level. So what do they need? They need Christ's church to go in there and be the hands and feet of our Lord and bring them the truth of the gospel. So why did you shut down 40 healthy parishes? 40 healthy parishes. Think of all the children who will grow up remembering that their bishop kicked them out of their church. I mean, this is something that the Holy Father is going to have to wrestle with. And I'm still, trying to be very positive about it. And I think there's much to be positive about. But, at the moment, there's some concerning signs that, we're seeing. We've seen, of course, the new head of the Pontifical Academy for Life was put in yesterday, right? He's given some very pro contraceptive and euthanasia statements before in the past. We saw recently the appointment of the St. Gallen diocese in Germany was a pro-homosexual, pro-female ordination bishop that was approved by the Pope. And so it's like, Holy Father, if you want to have a unified church, then do what you said, which is that we have to be unified in Christ, unified in doctrine. We can't allow this stuff to continue. if you want, Jordan, go to the because you can actually find a summary of most of the points of the document. Go to the end where you see the bullet points.
Yeah.
And you can start looking through the bullet points, because in the bullet points, he gives the specifics of this crackdown. This crackdown, again, is not mostly about the TLM. The TLM is kind of the whipping boy that he uses in here. It's kind of the bad illustration. But this is talking about the new mass. That's what's crazy.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right here. So I was like, as I've said to the listeners, to the viewers there, I was like, man, this is a long document, and Nick can do his 2-hour live streams, but but I can't. So let's go. So did you see something in particular? I can find it specifically, but I do remember seeing something about. We talked a little bit about the mantillas earlier.
Yeah,
here it is.
So, yeah, I was going to say, if you want, you can read that one.
Chosen to wear a veil as an expression of personal piety are not to do so when they are assisting in any official capacity, lector, cantor, altar server, usher, etc. I hope I see as a former altar boy, I hope I see a prohibition on Nike tennis shoes and jeans. Do you suppose that's in this document, Nick, or no?
I wish. Unfortunately, no. What's really sad about this is that basically all of the worst implementations that you can possibly think of, like 1970s but banal quote unquote Catholicism, you see in this. So like, just reading it off of my screen, if you go to the section where it says liturgical norms, I'll read out for you guys some of this stuff, because it's pretty wild. He says, so this is the first one. He says, quote, "In terms of the altar and its appointments, the following characterizes the public sanctuaries in our sacred spaces." So basically, the bishop is going to say, this is what I want your guys' churches to look like. He says, letter A, "In new constructions and renovations of sacred spaces, altar rails are not permitted, and therefore the sanctuary is to be separated from the nave by the change in elevation." Now, what's crazy about this, y'all, if you go and watch my video, I have linked the Holderate article that we're talking about right here. Yes, Anthony does look a whole lot different. He's even more, he's even more black than most Italians are. That's just what happened. That's what happened.
American born and bred, baby.
But what's interesting in this is that actually he quotes from the General Instruction of the Roman Missal. And this is something I've made in my larger series criticisms of the new mass, is that a lot of these things that, again, our brothers in Christ who want more of the reverent new mass, the stuff that they're talking about, they have to recognize that these aren't abuses. These are in the missal. Like these aren't just stuff that they're kind of pulling out of nowhere, right? And so he says that you're supposed to have no altar rails are permitted. And he says movable altar rails should be removed, and permanently fixed altar rails should no longer be used, right? And so if you have, I guess, a bunch of kneelers you're using, right, get them out of the way. If you do have an altar rail already in your church, you're not allowed to use them. He says in paragraph B, the altar is to be freestanding and the mass must be celebrated facing the people. So in the larger document, he talks about the, quote, evils, if you will, of ad orientem. And this one for me was really quite wild. He says, C, during the celebration of the liturgy of the Eucharist, the altar is only to contain the corporal purificator, vessels containing the Eucharistic elements in the Roman Missal. There is no mention of a missal stand. And again, he's quoting the New Mass Missal here. If a priest with visual impairments needs it, he can use it, etc. But then this is the crazy one. In terms of candlesticks, they are always to be arranged around the altar, since placing them on the altar will always obstruct the vision of the faithful. Quoting the New Mass Missal again. So no candles on the altar. Then this one for me is crazy. When a cross cannot be placed near the altar, it is to be laid flat on the mensa, so on the table, so that the faithful's view is not obstructed. So no altar cross. He's banning the crucifix from the altar. He continues and he says, flowers and decorations may never be placed on the mensa. Again, quoting the New Mass Missal here. Right? He's quoting all of these things. Further down, he talks about when it comes to music, right? He says that music is always supposed to be in the congregation's native language. The books are supposed to be bilingual. He says further up in the document that there's supposed to be no Gregorian chant. There's supposed to be no sacred polyphony at all, which is just wild. He also says that right here, he says in subsection 2a, no person may change, add, or remove any part of the rubrics, prayers, or text of the liturgy, right, Sacram Sanctum Concilium. This means that elements of the preconciliar mass, or the TLM, which were eliminated by the Apostolic See, must not be introduced. And he gives some examples. One example that he gives in subsection E is the ringing of bells at the beginning of Mass. So no ringing of bells at the beginning of
Goodness
Mass.
gracious.
That is bad. He says that it is praiseworthy for all masses to have people. Well, let me quote you exactly what he says in that section because it's pretty wild. He says this: the ringing of bells to signal the congregation to stand before the opening hymn is no longer to be used at any Mass. A verbal welcome by the lector.
Oh, good morning, church. We back.
Exactly. Followed by an indication of a hymn to be sung and an invitation to stand is the most appropriate and should be the most normative in all masses.
Nick, I just want to point out you've been a Catholic less time than me, and I'll be nice. I'll be nice to the Novus Orders in my area because things generally speaking are a little bit better here in the quite considerably better here in Denver than they were when I was growing up. But let me tell you, if you had told me if at 10 years old, how does Mass begin, Jordan? I would have believed that it would have. Oh, did you die? Oh no, there.
No, you're good.
I thought that the Freemasons got you for a second. I was very worried. I would have believed that it was the oftentimes the lector standing up, good morning, church, and everyone says good morning, and they're like, as we prepare to celebrate what do they call it? They called it this Eucharistic banquet. We ask you to turn your cell phones off and please remove gum from your mouths. I remember that was a very distinct thing. I remember that was extraordinarily distinct growing up in places. Like, please remove gum from your mouths. And then when I went to California, that was one of the first times I saw in Mass when it was like, now please stand and greet your neighbor. You gotta hello. Our opening hymn is number 744, Table of Plenty, in your breaking bread hymnals. Come to the feast of heaven and earth. Dude, I'm telling you, I got all these Catholics. We have so many people watching right now. I got to tell you, Catholics in the chat, you all know the liturgical trauma that we had. Where's our apology? Like, it's nowhere. So when I read this stuff, it's wild to me because it is like all these books and all these documentaries I watched from the 70s and the 80s from all these different places coming back in real time in the 2020s. You can't even breathe.
It's really bad. Thankfully, after just 3 new Masses, I was out. And so the first thing essentially that I heard in Catholicism was Requiem et Aeterna. And it was the traditional Latin Mass.
Some people have all the luck.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly a godsend. But I mean, I feel bad for a lot of Catholics out there because, for instance, like he continues, he says this about music. He says, our present situation, Latin responses and Mass parts are not to be utilized in parish churches during regular celebrations since they hinder the people's participation. Retaining the use of Mass celebrated in Latin is not opportune in our present reality, since the faithful are not accustomed to it. Even in places where they have become used to it, right? So even if you've had it for a while, by more recent practice, this becomes problematic for visitors or even new parishioners and those coming to the faith for the first time.
Hey, Nick, these parishes are growing though, right?
Yeah, I would say maybe he should talk to all of the young people who are coming in because they're not coming into welcome to the feast of heaven on earth. Nope. Right? They're not coming into that. He talks about how there is supposed to be on Sundays and solemnities, right? There is not to be any designation of high or low, right? Mass when it comes to the new Mass. He even says that the vesting prayers, the traditional vesting prayers, are not to be used by the priest. He's not allowed to have fiddlebacks. He's not allowed to have a beretta. He's not allowed to cross his stole. He's not allowed to have lace. So when you look at all of these things, and again, trust me, for instance, when it comes to some of the other things, he says, you're not supposed to believe that communion received in the hand or on the tongue, one is better than the other, even though literally not just the theologians, but the Code of Canon Law and sacramentaries of the new rite of Mass say that it's preferable to be on the tongue and kneeling. It goes beyond that. And so when we look at all of this together, right, kind of as a congruent puzzle, what my point is that what this does is that this is the perfect example of the dying throes of a generation's hermeneutic of rupture, if you will.
Yeah.
It is holding on to it. And, and agree, exactly. He is rejecting Vatican II. So much of this, my friends, is not Vatican II going. I mean, again, people who say things like, I saw this in a YouTube short or Instagram short the other day. By the way, priests need to get off Instagram. All priests. That's my hot take for
Yeah,
them.
you're right,
All
fam. That's our territory. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. You got the pulpit. You got the pulpit. We got the iPhone. But that's our pulpit. But basically, in this video, what happened is the priest got asked the question, like, what are your thoughts about chapel veils? And this was an older priest, and the priest said, Vatican II got rid of chapel veils.
Yep.
Vatican II says nothing about veiling, not one word about veiling. The basic argument about why veiling was kind of halted was just the Code of Canon Law in 83 didn't mention it. And so because it wasn't mentioned, a lot of people thought, well, we're not required to do this anymore, etc. The point is that a lot of these liberals have gone so far, right, in their interpretations of things that basically it is, as Benedict said, they've made the council into super dogma, and they've done a whole lot of horrible things. What are your thoughts? Because after you give your thoughts, I want to give my pitch for kind of some videos I'm going to be making on the subject, but I want to give like an initial cool pitch to you, because I actually have some what I would consider to be common sense proposals that the church could implementate under Pope Leo that might actually get us out of this mess.
I'm all ears. So I'll just say this, and trying to keep my typical sanguine golden retriever energy here.
So much easier to be melancholic. I'm just saying.
It's so, I know, right? Because melancholics are like, it's worse, and I told you so, right?
Yeah.
We're like, why is this happening? Oh man, there's so much to unpack. Like I said, it is wild. And some people here in the chat do know about the book, like Environment and Art in Catholic Media. And if not, they should check out the earlier stream. But you brought up a distinction there that I think is very important, which was there is this letter of Vatican II, which was ambiguous in a lot of places and problematic in a lot of places, and traditional bishops as well as liberal bishops kind of didn't quite know what to make of it. But then there's a reason why, especially growing up, people really talked about the spirit of Vatican II. And that's actually the kind of area of study that I'm curious in whenever I encounter a book or a site or a piece of media that talks about the spirit, because it's not enough just to see the letter or something. You have to see what these people thought outside of their best behavior, which is why I think it's wild to me that I'm reading, and you just highlighted the exact same wording, almost to the letter in places, that Environment and Art in Catholic Media has. That a lot of these worse, there's a documentary called The New American Catholic. It's from 1965. It's like right at the conclusion of the council. And they're interviewing Catholic priests, they're interviewing laity, they're interviewing people who left the priesthood, left the bishopric, about what they think the changes are. And those people are very candid. They think that in 5 years, they're going to have married priests, and it's not the Mass of Paul VI yet. So it's this hybrid Latin Mass with guitars. It's really, really trash. Very embarrassing. And you can see there's a video of the priests getting together in the public school or the Catholic schools of Chicago. And this is the year that they decide to open the doors to everyone. And the Sacred Heart nuns, this is the year that they ditched their habits and said that we are no longer restricted by the trappings of a medieval costume, they call it. Everywhere these reforms have been implemented, everywhere that where we see wreck your sanctuaries, no more altar rails, no chapel veils, no Latin, not even at the behest of the faithful, whatever it is. But mind you, make sure that you have hymnals in both English and Spanish. All the places that we've seen are falling off a cliff right now. And yeah, it's positive. There were a lot of new converts to the church. Don't get me wrong. There's some things to be very positive on. But one thing about a lot of these new converts, you talked about this just now, these guys are not entering and immediately yearning for the 70s. And since I interact very commonly with people who don't really have an interest in the traditional Latin Mass, even I would say the general feel of the Novus Ordo where I'm experiencing is just leaps and bounds different again than what I had growing up. So all I can think about, and I'll turn it on to you, but all I can think about as I read this is terribly unfortunate. It's kind of wild again to see what our traditional ancestors had to go through here in this microcosm of the Diocese of Charlotte. I wish I could tell you that I think the story is going to play out very positively, but I for all my brothers and sisters out there, I'm praying for you because I think there's going to be a lot of pain. But I also believe that this too shall pass someday. And I'm praying that God thinks that we need less of a chastisement here with our new Pope in this year of hope and all this jazz. But I'm not sure. I can't promise that. So Nick, let me turn to you. I want to hear these pitches, man. But it is just very unfortunate. It really is breaking my heart. Through these smiles, like it really is unfortunate.
Yeah, I feel bad because shout out to a lot of you guys coming over from Wagner's stream. Yeah, like my friend Wagner lives in that diocese, and so while he's under the he's in the ordinariate, it still affects him on a practical level being in that place. And also shout out to Sanctus, welcome brother to the stream. I love your content. Basically, here's my pitch, and I think pretty much everybody, kind of regardless of where you are in like the broader conservative trad perspective, I think we can probably get along and agree with what I'm about to say. This is kind of Nick's common sense proposal to fix a lot of the issues in the crisis. Wagner said, St. Lefebvre, pray for us. Hoover based.
I just went to the Immaculata, by the way.
Yeah, no, I know. That was awesome. That was cool that you got to go. Here's my pitch. Let me talk first real quick about unrealistic things that are not going to happen. Unrealistic things that are not going to happen for both parties, right? So what I'm going to talk about is, on the one hand, there are good conservative Catholics, the JP2 Benedict wing, if you will, who want the reverent Latin New Mass. There are other sane traditionalists, I would hopefully consider myself and you one, right, which want the traditional Latin Mass, right, and the traditional teaching of the church to be very clear, the disciplines of the church to be, more rigorous, etc. Right? We're not talking about the rad trads who reject Vatican II or the neo-modernists who super dogmatize the council, like Benedict said, and therefore ditch all of tradition. What's a good common middle ground? I think this is two ideas. When it comes to Vatican II, Pope Leo has the unique ability, I think, and the unique opportunity, rather, to do the following. If the Pope is to come out and do what Bishop Schneider recommends, right, who I believe he's the holiest man on planet Earth, in my opinion, at the moment. He
more than
recommends
Jordan Pacheco?
So true, yes, more than Jordan Pacheco and Nick Cavazos combined. But he suggests the following in his work, Christus Vinci. He says, if a pope was to go in, not trash Vatican II, because guys, Vatican II is not going to go away. That's just a reality. It's not going to go away. But if he was to go into Vatican II and clean up some of the language, right? Clean up some of the language in order to make the faithful understand better, the whole church understand better, as well as publish, and this is again my idea, a official neo-scholastic commentary that says, here is the strict interpretation of Vatican II, the orthodox interpretation of Vatican II. And then the Pope, in his official capacity as shepherd of the whole church, he needs to, under pain of anathema, bind the whole church to this and say, this is the official interpretation of Vatican II, just like in the Council of Trent, we bound the faithful and all Catholics to certain interpretations of verses. We do this to Vatican II. So clean this up, anathematize those things. Also release Cardinal Burks' statement of truth, his declarations of truth, and say everybody who denies the following on human sexuality, communism, false interpretations of the council, right, etc., anathema, right? Bind the whole church to these things. What this does is that it takes Vatican II and it says, okay, Vatican II is a legitimate and valid ecumenical council. But we can also say on a historical level, it has caused a lot of issues, right? So let's clean it up. We're not getting rid of it, but let's clean it up, right? And we'll go forward. Also, practically speaking, go in then to the catechism, right? And clean up some of the questionable things. So like, for instance, when it says that we and the Muslims adore the one God, in the realm of natural theology, you can like explain that away in 400 pages. And there's a truth that can be interpreted in that. But for your average person in the street, let's be honest. Do they have an entire degree in theodicy? No, they don't. They look at that and they think that we all worship the same God in the same sense, right? That all religions are just passed to the one God, right? That's something that's false. So go in and clean those up. Also, release manuals again into the seminaries and say, this is the official interpretation of Vatican II going forward. And then the last thing I'll say is this. When it comes to the Mass issue, codify Summorum Pontificum and say, every priest, bishop in the world can say the Missal of 1962 with no restrictions on it, that this is a beautiful and sacred and holy rite of antiquity, venerable. It should be promoted and publicized here, there, and everywhere. And also, if we want the new Mass to lose a lot of the abuses, or oftentimes, as you can see with the general instruction, the innate issues with it, right? Then what needs to be done is the following. We're only using the Roman canon. only the Roman canon, period.
Yes.
We are going to do the Mass ad orientem. Most of it is going to be in Latin. And the problematic passages, for instance, the offertory, where it is very ambiguous and it doesn't seem to suggest a propitiatory sacrifice, we're going to use the traditional Mass as offertory, and we'll put it in Latin there, right? Gregorian chant has pride of place. Sacred polyphony can be introduced, of course, right? Only male altar servers, because this is their progress to the priesthood, right? Some of the prayers that don't really emphasize things like hell or the propitiatory sacrifice, they get cleaned up. If you can do those two broad things, those two massive things, then we move past this paradigm of Vatican II squabbling in the church. We move past it, and we can focus as Catholics on the mission that we're not looking at right now. Like, the big tragedy right now is we are not looking at the main mission for what we have. We have two missions, if you will, wrapped up together. The mission to become a saint that we're all called to, right? When we're looking and getting distracted at these wars, we lose precious time that we could be like striving to become a saint. But then two, we can focus on actual evangelization and preaching the gospel to the lost, not sitting back and saying, well, my bishop won't allow an altar crucifix here, or saying, well, okay, I want you to come to the Catholic Church, but in fact, when I invite you to church, we're not actually in the church because we're banned from being in the church. That's an awkward conversation to have. Hey, parents, mom and dad, real situation. I want you to become Catholic, but you can't come to Mass with me in the church. Oh, why is that, son? Well, how much time do you got? You know,
Here's your 400 pages.
Yeah, all of these things, if we were to clean them up, would be solved. The trads, including the SSPX, right? The SSPX would say, okay, it's time to get regularized. It's all good to go. We've cleaned up all the ambiguous stuff about religious liberty, ecumenism. We're all good to go. You can have your new Mass. It's been reformed. And then also the communio people on the other side, right? They can say, okay, you know, yeah, there were some issues with the council, especially how it handled. You guys can keep your TLM. It should be celebrated. It should not be a rupture. And in a way, let's let Lefebvre and Benedict go arm in arm into the future. You know, that would be the ideal that would go forward. And so in the chat, and then also you, Jordan, what are your thoughts? Do you think that this is a common sense proposal that both the Orthodox camps and Catholicism can agree on?
Brother, I talked about this to the letter with Bishop Strickland. So I think very much so. I do want to kind of say this, because I think everything that you said there, and being able to have these great conversations with you and to study a little bit more of the issues, the problems, seeing what the SSPX highlights, seeing what the communal people highlight, and then kind of, I'm like I said, I'm a church pragmatist, right? I don't like when the good is the enemy of the pure, because, you know, I think you just have to slow roll it. Like, if people are like, yo, what if the Pope tomorrow was like, nothing but the church Latin Mass? I'm like, I think it'd be harmful just right off the bat. I think that you just have to be, I think that you have to just be very realistic. That being said, this is what I do want to say, Nick, and I'll put it back to you as you wind down here. Someone in the chat mentioned that they're out in Kansas City. I have family out in Kansas City. I actually went to a Mass out in Kansas City, and a lot of what you're talking about was already being implemented. I saw the Roman canon. I saw the Latin antiphons. I saw an altar rail and communion received on the tongue. I saw an ad orientem Mass. And what's weird is that now I have family members. I'm like the only trad out in my family. You know, I come from a pretty deep Hispanic conservative Catholic family. I love them all. So that's why I try to be very nice to the Novus Ordo. We have these great conversations, but I always like to take a step back and just, you know, I know a lot of faithful Catholics who attend the new Mass. And for a lot of them, my family included, that's all there was, and that's all that we knew. So I try to be very, very gentle with my family members there. That being said, something that's very weird is now I have a lot of family members where ad orientem, a Mass seen that way, is expected. It's the norm. So much so that when I went to your great state of Texas and I'm at Christmas Mass with my sister apologizing throughout what I thought was like an average, you know, vigil Mass for the Novus Ordo. And she said something wild to me, which is, it just feels like Mass is stuck in the 90s because the priest, in her words, the priest isn't facing the tabernacle. That's what she said. Yeah. When she said that blew my mind, because what that meant is that someone like my sister, who's not in the liturgy wars, right, who doesn't read the Pillar or Rorate Caeli or watch my videos or Nick's videos or whoever's videos, for her, Mass felt stuck. It felt outdated. The reforms are feeling dated. And it turns out that the return to tradition is feeling timeless. So and I see people in the chat talking about how, it's if the mass was the traditional Latin mass, and we saw these proposals that you suggest, Nick, how quick did it take the reformers to really burn down a lot of the world as it had been built up? And how quick, again, really could, a generation later, and our children would be raised this way in the traditional rites, there's going to be entire fights that we're having, that we're going through, that I really pray that our children don't have to go through. And so I when I read these, it's we obviously highlight what's happening with the traditional Latin mass out in the diocese and abroad, but even looking at these bands inside the Novus Ordo, I think what that represents to me ultimately is that the reforms aren't working. And ironically, the folks who tore away all the tradition, all the authority back in the times of the 60s and the 70s are now having to invoke it to put their band hammer down, because naturally things are skewing in the way that you're proposing. I actually very firmly believe that by the time, like in 10 years from now, I would not surprise me if half the Novus Ordo masses I see are adorantum. They already are kind of, in this diocese, they're kind of actually accelerating. It's wild to see. Any priest, any young man who's going to give up family life, a career, sacrifice his life for Christ and join the priesthood, so many of them are coming out. We've seen the statistics. They're like, yo, I'm a conservative Orthodox priest. Even if they're not involved in the liturgy wars, they just want to say the mass, and they want to be able to wear their cassocks, and they want to talk about the importance of the sacraments and staying in a state of grace. They just want to be authentically Catholic. The identity crisis is going away naturally because the generation who really dug their heels in with it is now going to their eternal reward. Bishop Martin represents one of the last guard, I think. I really do pray that some of these issues just are not going to be around because there are no foot soldiers behind it. Right. Yeah. You're just finding less and less. This Pope Francis era was very strange in that regard, because what we saw is in the very beginning, it seemed like there was all the support for the last push of the big efforts to liberalize the church, and it didn't work because, fun fact, it's not a human institution, it's Christ's institution. So yeah. I think it's very important. And this is just, I'll pass it back to you here, but I get, for all of our viewers, I get that it feels like there are storm clouds. I get that when the Pope does something and it seems or is problematic, that it's easy to just hang up the towel. I find traditionalists and conservatives, ironically, I find are naturally pessimistic. I feel like they're very quickly to be like, they want to be the first to get out there and say, I told you so, I knew this was going to happen, and now there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And I'm just, maybe it's my sanguine grace here, but I think just generally speaking, the more I kind of understand that not just the historical patrimony of the church, but its spiritual heritage coming from Christ's words himself, the more I'm saying, well, then we have to just engage this with laughter and war. If your bishop is acting a fool, your goal is to pray for him. And maybe you recognize and resist. I don't know. Maybe you go find your society chapel. Maybe you have a parish priest offer a Latin mass underground in the catacombs. I don't know. I'm just saying things. But that's important, that we should engage in these things with prayer, with fasting, that we don't need to be just gloomers and doomers all the time, walking around saying it's so over, bro, all the time. Mm-hmm. Charlotte, you guys have a fight on your hands. It's a fight for the wider church. I've watched so many parishes affected by Traditionis Custodes. I've watched so many people gleefully enter the Catholic Church and really, really, by their own witness, clearly move towards the traditional elements of the church, away from this liberal interruption. And I'm just going to sit back. Like, some of these issues, Nick, and so many of those things that you proposed, maybe in our lifetime we'll see that resolved. But at the very least, I think that we'll see that get more and more clear as the weight of history simply rolls on. And that's something that we always have to stay engaged in. It's like, it's Project Prio, right? There is that pray, hope, and don't worry. And it's not that we have to have this false sense of happiness, right? Oh, we get to congratulate Bishop Martin for doing such a great exercise of his office. But it's just to realize, like, yeah, it's Christ's church at the end of the day. And I think that God already is doing some great things sorting it out. And I think we have to play our part in that.
Yeah, beautifully said. I guess the last thing I'd add for everybody is, not to compare, of course, this bishop to the person of the Pharisees. So please don't interpret that. But this is just kind of the analogy that comes to mind, which is that when you look at the Pharisees, a lot of the Pharisees knew the signs of the times. They knew that Christ's movement was growing. In fact, many of the saints, St. Thomas included, says that the Pharisees knew that he was the Messiah. But it was due to pride and obstinacy that they dug their heels in and crucified the Lord of glory. In other words, they just wouldn't listen. They wouldn't allow this movement to go. And this is why finally, eventually, you had Gamaliel, right, wisely say, like, if this movement be of man, it will disappear. But if it be of God, then you might find yourself in opposition to God if you oppose it. Well, this would just be my, kind of charitable throwing it out to the bishop. Not to just this bishop, but all the bishops of the world and all the priests of the world and to the Holy Father, is that there is nothing wrong with Catholic tradition. And let's look, to use kind of a Vatican II buzz term, but like, let's look at the signs of the times. The signs of the times are the church is moving toward the tradition. It is going back to that. And we can stall it. You can put up all the roadblocks you want. We can have another 20-year pontificate of throwing roadblocks up. We can continue to be persecuted, but it is not going to go away. Yeah. That's just the reality. Like, the hand of God is on the traditional missal, whether people like it or not. Whether you're a person, who doesn't go, but, finds it beautiful, or whether you're a dyed-in-the-wool supporter like we are, or even if you're an opponent, right, who's been Catholic for 5 minutes and likes to tell cradle Catholics they're in schism for not obeying every single thing the bishop does. Like, the Latin Mass is not going away. The tradition is not going away. And so the question for all of us here is just, are we willing to fight for it? And so the last thing I'll say is, on that notion of pray, hope, and don't worry, big thing in the first one is to prayer. Have great confidence toward God, but also believe practically move. So what I mean by this is that if you can, move to a place where there's a traditional Latin Mass. Also raise awareness to your bishop, write to the bishop, respectfully, kindly, charitably, let him know the genuine requests. Write to the Pope. Every single person here should write a friendly letter to the Pope, telling him that you're praying for him, and then ask him to rescind Traditionis Custodes. I believe that good things can happen. There was a lot of people, you guys know who you were out there. There was a lot of people who doubted me when it came to a certain election prediction that took place not a while back. They were saying, it's all over. Like, why are you spending your time, wasting your time? Yep. It's all over. It's not going to get any better. And I'm not saying again in it that it was like, sunshine and rainbows and that everything has been perfect. I'm not saying that. Point being, though, is there was a lot of doomers out there who told me there's no point in voting at all. Well, I was right. The point is just a lot of people out there should just write to the Pope, and get to that too. How do we write to the Pope? You can actually just write to the Pope a letter and send it to, I think the address is out there, but it's just the Apostolic See. Make a letter for us so we can send it out. Yeah, I'll make a letter for you guys. I'll make a letter and I'll put it up there on the channel for you guys.
Send it. I'll share it on mine too. That's perfect.
We'll
good. Start. Looks like we'll be branded then, Nick. We'll be international villains.
So true.
Yeah, man, Nick, it's always a pleasure. Like, as soon as I was reading this stuff, I was thinking of his man. I just have to talk to Nick. We started with Traditionis, so we can't stop now. But you should know that I really appreciate what your mission is on your channel. I've been really watching that. I think it's been incredible. It's been a great year for you, not just in terms of growth, but also just in terms of the great wealth of content which you bring. So I'm very happy to call you a friend. If I was going to disagree with anyone about dancing, I wouldn't want it to be anyone else but you. So
true.
So yeah, I think this is the end here. But friends, if you're on my channel, you haven't subscribed to Nick, please do. Oh my gosh, Nick Cavazos, the traditional Thomist, just absolutely great content. And if you're on Nick's channel, maybe you can subscribe to the Glad Tribe.
Yeah, I was about to say, the vast majority of you guys who I'm seeing in the chat, you guys are all regular viewers of mine. So go and check out Jordan's channel. Jordan was one of my first interviewees way back, like, goodness, 4 years ago. Time flies. And so definitely go check him out because he puts forward a lot of good content. And he also, because he's a sanguine, he's not as doom pillish as some other people out there. So that can be helpful.
No, we gotta balance out. You know what I mean? These are two great lungs of the church. Great. Well, guys, please also don't forget to pray, not just for our affected Catholic brothers and sisters in the Diocese of Charlotte, but certainly also for His Excellency Bishop Martin, that we have Sauls who become Pauls in the church, and we can't lose hope on that too. So it's very possible perhaps he sees the error of his ways, the mistake, the hurt that he is causing, and I would rejoice very happily. As I said this with Pope Francis, right? I will be the first to rejoice very happily when someone simply says, I'm sorry, and I was wrong. And then he can take Nick's proposals to the Pope, and I think the world will be all right again.
Let's hope.
God bless you, Nick. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. All right. We'll see you on the next one. All right.
Adios, y'all.